Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're really grateful for your time and attention. We've got some really important information to share with you this afternoon. Let me just start by why I wanted to speak with you all about the new Senate File 2340 law. And just a quick background, during this legislative session in Iowa, the legislature had actually proposed 4 bills, and we are going to call them anti-immigration bills or anti-immigrant bills, and that they really are targeting immigrants in the state of Iowa and really sending a message that you're not welcome here in various ways. Fortunately, through the advocacy of so many of you, we were able to resist and put a pause to 3 of them. Unfortunately, the one bill that did survive and make it through the legislature and was signed by Governor Reynolds on April 10th was Senate File 2340. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what this bill is and what it means. And there are a lot of unknowns with this bill. And the most important thing is today is not intended to create hysteria or scare people. I want this so that people are informed and so that you can be engaged in the process with us to combat anti-immigrant rhetoric, anti-immigrant bills like this in our state. So Senate File 2340 essentially says that this would be a new crime created under our Iowa statute. It is a new crime for what we call illegal entry into the state of Iowa. Since it was signed by Governor Reynolds on April 10th, it would go into effect July 1st, 2024 of this year, unless there is a lawsuit filed to enjoin or stop the law from going into effect. This law makes it unlawful for a person, and I want to stress that, I'm going to explain why that matters. For a person, it could include United States citizens, lawful permanent residents who have green cards, immigrants, undocumented immigrants, or refugees or former refugees. Any one of those individuals or persons who enters the state of Iowa, attempts to enter the state of Iowa, or is found in Iowa after that person has been ordered removed or deported from the United States and or been denied admissions to the United States. It also then allows local law enforcement to stop, detain, and arrest someone and prosecute the individual if they believe that individual to be in violation of this criminal provision. And then it would then process the person through our state courts and then have a state court judge order that individual to be deported. Now, deported where? We don't know, but just deported out of the state of Iowa. Which countries can accept them? We don't know, but we suspect that what their intention is to deport them to Mexico. But we know immigrants and people of all sorts in the United States come from all the countries besides Mexico. That's really the summary of this bill. Now, from our perspective as a faith-based organization, as Catholic Charities, we've been in many conversations with many of our partners here on the call today as well about, advocating against this bill. But now that this bill has been passed and signed, how do we help to minimize or mitigate or stop this bill from going into effect? There are, from our perspective, several legal problems and, most importantly, I would say humanitarian issues with this law. And I don't want to go into the legal weeds of why this bill is problematic on the legal end, but I wanted to share on a high level. We know that this bill is a copycat bill from other states like Texas and Florida, and we know that right now the Texas bill, SB4, is very similar to our bill. There's a few things different from it, but essentially the message is anyone who's an immigrant or undocumented is not welcome and will be deported, removed out of the state. The main legal problem with this bill that we've raised with the legislators when this bill was introduced is that there's something called the Supremacy Clause in the United States Constitution. And what that means is that federal law preempts state law in any area that Congress has exclusive authority and jurisdiction. In this case, immigration law and the administration of immigration law is exclusive to the federal government, not to state government. So because of that, we firmly believe that this contradicts the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution. And for the legal folks in here, this is what we call a federal preemption issue that we would see that's problematic with this bill. Now, whether this bill is going to survive any litigation, we don't know. But I also want to reassure you that there's been other legal experts in the state and around the country that have been having conversations about not just the Texas bill, but the Iowa bill too. And there are conversations going around the state regarding what would happen if there was going to be a lawsuit and what that would look like. The other issue that is problematic with this that has to do with the legal component is, as far as I know, the state of Iowa cannot just remove or deport a person to another sovereign country, for example, to Mexico. The United States has what we call bilateral repatriation agreements with countries, and it only permits federal governments to really have these agreements. And as far as we know, Iowa is not a party to these agreements. And therefore, even if, let's say, an Iowa judge does find someone here to be removable or deportable, where would they deport them to? If they wanted to deport them to Mexico, would Mexico even agree to that? And we know that Mexico representatives from the federal government, Mexico, in other press release have expressed concern about the Iowa bill as well as the Texas bill. But the most important thing about this bill that's problematic is not just for faith leaders and people working in this organization, but just on a humanitarian level, this bill is cruel and it's extreme anti-immigrant rhetoric. And it puts into play not just the rhetoric, but now there's actual legal criminal implications if someone was found to be here in Iowa to be undocumented or to be priorly removed, right? And the issue that is really heart-wrenching about this is we are seeing that potentially this bill could lead to in a situation, and I'll provide an example, is maybe someone was here as an immigrant, and maybe through a course of events, that person actually was deported or removed by an immigration judge, 12 years ago. And they actually complied with that and left the United States and stayed out of the country for the requisite time. And through our federal immigration law, lawfully can re-enter back into the United States through, let's say, a family-based reunification process. Or maybe in this case, through the federal immigration process, they are able to receive a waiver and come into the United States back in to complete or pursue maybe their U visa, or maybe they were a victim of trafficking and they can pursue that in the United States after they've been deported, right? And they're back here in the state of Iowa, and perhaps they already have citizenship, or perhaps they already have lawful status. That person, under this law right now as it's written, would be found in violation of this law, and that person would be subject to this criminal prosecution. And so that's why this law is really heartbreaking, because it doesn't account for these particular scenarios. It's really extreme in that there is no, right now, the way the law is written, no, what we call in the legal sense, affirmative defense, or no way to explain that, say, hey, don't deport me yet. I actually have a legitimate pending immigration process. I actually have legal status. Yes, I was previously deported, but I complied with your United States immigration law and returned into the United States lawfully. I'm in the state of Iowa pursuing my other immigration relief. And so this is why this law is problematic on those legal grounds as well. But just on the humanitarian piece, we believe this law really doesn't focus on keeping families together, keeping our communities safe. This law advocates for really separating families and dehumanizing and targeting immigrant communities. And this is not just even immigrant communities. U.S. citizens would be impacted. We're talking about individuals. Let's say you have individuals who fall into that category from a different state, and they have family here in Iowa. If someone is undocumented or were formally removed or deported, living in the state of Wisconsin or Illinois or Minnesota, and have family or friends here in the state of Iowa, they would not be able to feel secure and safe to enter the state of Iowa, because if they were stopped by law enforcement and fell under these categories or criteria, they could be prosecuted here in Iowa for those too. So those are the real repercussions of this law. And what I wanted to really focus on is that I know this is scary for a lot of our communities in the state of Iowa here, and there are a lot of questions. I'm not here to provide legal advice or tell you that everything will be fine. But what I'm going to be here to do is be a resource to share information that we're aware of, that we know, and really encourage you all to stay engaged and active, because there are so many things going on that you can take part in, and let our governor, let our state legislators, let your local law enforcement and community know that this doesn't keep families safe, this doesn't keep our community safe, and that we want to cooperate. We want people to do the right thing, but this law is not the way to go about doing that. So we will do our part to make sure that all Iowans feel welcome in the state. I think that our Iowa motto, our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain, these are not exclusive to one segment of Iowans, that we're all Iowans, and immigrants of all color and faith and creed, they should have the same respect. And their humanity should be recognized as well. And this law doesn't do that. So let's help each other uplift the voices of immigrants by being engaged and helping where we can to educate and be informed, because I think the most important power is being informed and being educated about this bill and this law, so that we can help reassure anyone who's scared about this law. And that the most important thing is we are getting lots of questions like, should I move back to wherever they're from? And I've been telling people, no, this law doesn't go into effect until July 1st. Please make sure you talk to community advocates who are informed about this law, so we can advise you and provide you resources so you feel secure and prepared if anything goes with respect to this law, whether it gets stopped or whether it does proceed forth after July 1st. We are engaged with other state entities and organizations, immigrant rights organizations, to help push out information as best as we can. So you're part of that. So whether you work with immigrants or not, you're a service provider, you're part of the community, you make a huge impact into the lives of individuals that may be impacted by this law. Lauta asking, what are police chiefs saying? Well, if you talk to one police chief, you talk to one police chief. It's really, there's a lot of diverse opinions about it. And what we've seen in the media is that there's mixed feelings about this, but this law, because we believe it to be unconstitutional, one of the biggest things that we've been trying to educate law enforcement agencies is this law is going to bring a lot of legal and financial liability that police departments in cities and municipalities should be aware of. Because at the end of the day, police chiefs and the police departments are the ones having the burden to execute this law. Do they have the proper training? Do they have the proper resources? Do they have the proper funding to do that, first of all? And then second of all, are they trained in immigration law to know what type of documents is sufficient to prove or show if someone has been previously removed or deported, or if someone has legal status in the United States? Those are questions that we don't have answers to, but this is a perfect opportunity to follow up with your law enforcement to say, please understand this law, understand what this means for our communities, and understand that this law brings more heartache and trouble than what it really is saying. They're saying, we agree, the federal immigration system is a broken system and there needs to be a reform, but that is the responsibility of Congress and the federal government. We can't have 50 states having 50 different, quote, state immigration processes. That is not the intention of federal immigration law. A question about that is in the chat is, what did the Iowa County Attorneys Association's position on this bill? My understanding is that this bill, when it was being proposed and debated, the Iowa County Association of Attorneys had undecided. They did not take a position on it. But this is, again, a plea and an opportunity for those of you who have contacts with those entities to educate them and say, here's what this bill is. Do you understand this bill and why it's so harmful for our communities, but also why it's bad for the work that you're in as county attorneys, because you're the ones having to prosecute individuals, federal immigration law. And do you understand federal immigration law enough to do this job correctly and not potentially result in a potential, liability lawsuit? Question about what should we do if the police stop us and ask for our papers? Well, this is where it's really important. Catholic Charities, along with many other immigrant rights groups in the state, are happy to come to your community and host and do what we call Know Your Rights education. This is so important because regardless of your immigration status in the United States, you all have constitutional rights. And we want to be able to educate people on how to interact positively with law enforcement. I know in this call here, we have some great allies in the law enforcement field here. For those individuals, thank you for being here. Thank you to also being able to be accessible and approachable so that our immigrant community can come to you and ask, what should I do so that we cooperate and create a healthy, safe environment, a community. So I think I would just urge you all that if there are questions about how to interact with law enforcement, there are a lot of resources online, but if you want an in-person Know Your Rights workshop, please contact myself or Catholic Charities if there's interest in your community to host a Know Your Rights. I do want to just share a few events happening in the state of Iowa, particularly on May 1st. May 1st historically has been known as International Labor's Day, but I know Immigrant Rights Group has also been very active in doing outreach. And I'll make a plug here. So if David Goodner and Father Niels Hernandez are on the call, I know that on May 1st, there's 4 different events across the state that's happening. Iowa City, hosted by Escucha Mi Voice, is hosting a rally and a march to really speak up against Senate File 2340 law. I know this is also happening in Waterloo. Queen of Peace, Father Niels, is spearheading this. There'll be more information to come for those 2 events. I also know that in Des Moines and Davenport, they are also hosting similar information and events too. So there are many ways in which you can get involved and stay active. Here's the reality is that we don't know, because the way this law is written, it's really poorly written. And we'll include actually the text if anyone wants some night reading, the text to the bill and what it means, because there are provisions in the bill that talks about what I mentioned, someone who's been removed, deported, excluded, and then it also says someone who's been denied admission to the United States. So denied admission, what does that denied admission mean? Does that mean denied admission per United States federal immigration law? But even then, some of the legal terminology that's used in this bill actually references statute and federal law that is no longer valid. For example, the word excluded. Excluded is a 1996 immigration terminology that prior to that was used, but after that, 1996, it's no longer terminology that is valid under immigration laws. This bill is going to be complicated because there are so many gray areas that are unanswered if you were just to read the statute or read the law the way it is right now. But I think the reality is, we know in the United States here, we have a serious issue with racial profiling. This bill really opens the door for that wide open. Those are things that are going to be problematic in terms of the execution of this law. And that's why this makes this job really hard for our law enforcement, because they aren't trained in this. They don't have the resources to do this. And some of the law enforcement agencies we've talked to are really concerned about what this law means for their agencies, because they don't feel equipped to do that, and they don't want to do that. The language is very narrow in terms of those exceptions. And so it just says public or private primary, secondary school, church, synagogue, or other religious worship, healthcare facilities, or facilities that provide forensic medical examinations to sexual assault survivors. And you have to be on the premise. And so if you can imagine, many of us who are service providers who don't fall into one of these categories, if we have clients or customers or folks coming to visit us on their way or actually on our premise, they could be potentially detained and arrested if there is suspicion that they are in violation of this law. One of the things we'd like to educate people about is, in the United States right now, currently, with the exception of this bill, if you are here in the United States, in the state of Iowa, undocumented, without a visa or paper, that is a civil administrative violation. That is not a criminal federal violation. Of course, if someone is caught entering the United States illegally at a border or port of entry, that would be a federal criminal violation. But being physically present in the United States is not a violation of a criminal act under federal law. That's something that is a conversation that certainly can be had in our community, and that starts with conversations with our local municipalities, our local law enforcement, and having these conversations with mayors and police departments. And we may work as a police chief or a law enforcement officer, but I think we're all neighbors. And so at the end of the day, what I really want to focus on is for you all to share the message of hope, right? That we have an ability to resist these type of anti-immigrant, not just rhetoric, but actions. And so we also have to show up when these type of things happen so that we can let our immigrant and refugee neighbors know that they are truly welcome here. And once our neighbors understand we're human beings, we have the same desires of keeping our families safe and keeping our community safe, that should count for something. It's really heartwarming to know that there's interest in learning about this law and how this impacts us, and also figuring out how to communicate this and share information. Accurate information is power. It helps us prepare our communities. It helps us prepare ourselves so we can be engaged in whatever way we're comfortable and able to do so. Stay connected to immigrant rights organizations and their social media accounts. Many of us that are trying to put out accurate legal information to really help us fight this. But you can be scared, but you can also be active and be engaged. And that's the message, is it's okay to be scared, but the power is to be scared and still act and still resist and still be part of the community to say that I belong here just as much as my neighbor next door. You can also organize your own event in your own community. It doesn't have to be a march. It doesn't have to be a sit-in. It could really be a conversation, an engagement with your community. That's what makes change possible. Even if you're confronted by individuals who are, adamantly, opposed to having a welcoming state or community, this is your opportunity to educate and change hearts and mind. It may not change hearts and mind that day, but we have to keep pressing with that message. This year, because of the federal election calendar too, was a really short calendar for our state legislatures. There were a total of 4, as I mentioned, what I would term anti-immigrant bills, and 3 of them were put on pause and were defeated through the advocacy of you all and across the state, right? You all showed up and spoke and talk to your neighbors and legislators and stakeholders to say why those bills were not good for our community. The only bill that did survive is this Senate File 2340. And Brahm, I think you will have a note in the chat. Do you want to raise a question, comment?
If that's
Brahm
okay.
is also fabulous in our partnership here to educate people on this bill.
Thanks, sir. So my name is Brahm Elias. I run the Immigration Law Clinic practice area at the Legal Clinic at the University of Iowa College of Law. If at any point I ever seem smart or helpful in any way at all, it's because I have really good students doing the research before I say anything, like Victor, who's back there right now. So the thing I wanted to comment on, following on Megan's very thoughtful question of what about the 3 other bills that were moving through the legislature, and Zur's comment about there are legal questions about these things that we don't necessarily know the answers. We can give the information that we can give, but we don't know all the answers. The thing I'm about to say, I think will be pretty familiar for anyone who has been doing this kind of direct services work in immigrant communities for more than 4 years, or anyone who did this kind of work, say, between 2016 and 2020. What we are doing right now, the work that Zur is doing right now to help prepare us for this bill that's moved through the Iowa legislature and may or may not ever go into effect, and to help prepare us to be ready to serve our clients directly, which is hard to do at a time like this where we don't know the answers to whether the bill will go into effect and what precisely it means. Because if you ask lawyers about this bill, most lawyers will tell you this bill seems unconstitutional and unlikely to survive legal scrutiny. But we don't know for sure that that's going to happen. And it is difficult to be a service provider when your clients come to you distressed and say things like, what does this mean for me? And should I leave the state of Iowa? And what's going to happen to me after July? And we as service providers don't have clear answers in this middle phase when something has been proposed but has not gone into effect yet. The feeling of providing services in an environment like that is probably very familiar to those of us who did this type of work in the last presidential administration, when there was a nonstop flurry of proposed legal and policy changes, many of which seemed like, if you talk to lawyers, they were unlikely to survive legal scrutiny, but were still in the press or in the community as things that might happen, and led to clients, members of the community directly, coming to service providers and saying, what does this mean for me? Leaving us in a very stressful position of wanting to provide clear answers, not necessarily knowing clear answers, not wanting to do the work of the administration by sowing fear, and also not wanting to overpromise or to say things we didn't know the answers to. I don't have any specific advice for what we do with regard to this bill, other than listen to Zur and folks who provide, who can provide reliable information. I do want to say there is a chance that what we all are doing on this call right now is excellent practice for something we may have to do a lot in the next 4 years. I hope we don't have to, but we may have to. It is conceivable that we may be entering an environment soon where we are constantly asking, what about this other proposal, or these 5 other proposals, or these 20 other proposals? People are coming into my office saying they heard this on the news, or they heard this from a neighbor. And the main thing I want to say about that is how important calls like this are. Zur and folks who do preparatory work like this to give us a chance to learn what we can learn. Second, how important it is for us to be comfortable with uncertainty in a way that we haven't had to be comfortable as much for the past few years. And that, like, to do this work sustainably, we might need to live in a space where when our clients look to us for reassurance, we can provide some, but not as much as we'd like, to be comfortable with that feeling. And then most importantly, to suggest that calls like this, or any opportunities for us to work together, support each other, buoy each other up, remember that we're all in this together, we're all on the same side, and that we are working to protect, as Zur pointed out, a deeply Iowan tradition of protecting each other, protecting our neighbors, believing that we have rights and that we shall maintain them, that we are working in the spirit of something that's much larger than the crisis of the moment. And so anything we can do to help each other right now in this one experience, dealing with this one Senate bill, will probably be a really good building block for a skill we might have to develop quite a bit, and a chance to establish friendships and working relationships and collegial relationships that we might need to rely on a lot in the future. So Zur, I am super grateful to you for helping convene this, and I'm really grateful to everybody on this call, knowing that for reasons good or bad, we might be seeing a lot of each other in the years ahead, and win or lose, doing really good work together. And I'm really grateful to you, Zur, and to everybody who's here for being part of that community.
Thank you so much. I know there's way more questions probably than we have time for today, but we will have a similar info session on Friday specifically for Spanish speakers only. So individuals who want this or need this information in Spanish are able to access this information as well. Thank you, everyone.